Welcome to BNEWS Weekly Special Report. I'm Phil Gallagher, along with my guest today, Mr. Paul Sagarino, Burlington Town Administrator. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thanks for having me, Phil.
Thanks for coming. Paul is in his second year as the Town Administrator. He's in his 16th year as an employee in the town, previously having served as the Town Accountant. And this is a 2020 year in a review, and I'm sure all of us will be glad to see this in the rearview mirror. But what we want to do is, of course, COVID-19 is one of the major topics, but a lot went on in the town of Burlington from a governmental infrastructure and employee standpoint and services standpoint, and we want to begin talking about those things. And let's talk about two major expenditures of the year. One, of course, is the Highway Department, Rec Department combo construction down on Great Meadow Road. How much was that appropriation? How is it funded? What is the status of the project at this point?
It's a two-phase project. It's approximately $33 million total. Two phases. What we call the Clark and Reed site, which is a site that's being worked on now. If anybody's been by there, there's been some significant progress made on that end. And once we're able to complete that section, we move on to the second part of it, which was to renovate our original highway facility down the road further on Great Meadow, which is in desperate need of repairs right now.
Well, I was in the board in '82, and we talked about destroying that building in 1982, so I guess it's a long time coming. Now, let's talk about the funding for it. Mm-hmm. $33 million, obviously not out of free cash. How has that been taken care of?
That comes through borrowing, Phil. So we'll be paying that back over 30 years. It's all fit right into our debt plan. The town has always done, even prior to me arriving at the town, has done a great job of forecasting its debt and planning for expenditures like this. We have a lot of facilities here in town, and that one needed to be done desperately. If the highway barn wasn't bad enough, the facility that our rec maintenance employees were up on Overlook Drive was really quite deplorable. And you know, these are facilities that are going to be used for the next. We use our buildings for 80 to 100 years. I mean, this isn't a 40-year thing. We'll end up utilizing this building for the next 80 years. And
well, Union School's at least 100, and I think the center school, or the Human Resources Center, was built to a WPA building in 1935, I believe. So
yeah, we get a lot of mileage out of these things. They are big ticket items. We did factor it in so it wouldn't impact the residents. You know, there was no debt exclusions associated with that. It's just funded under the regular budget. Right. And again, we have to, you know, looking towards the future, we always have to invest in our infrastructure. And it was time for those two facilities. If you took a tour, you'd be surprised that you were in Burlington and that this was the type of facility that we were using.
And having our employees working.
Yes.
Sure. Now there's there's debt exclusion, and then there's 2.5 override, neither of which has been utilized in Burlington at this point.
Never in the history. Mm-hmm. So
now let's talk about siting. It's always been a thorn in people's side, or some people's side, that the siting of the DPW was right along the Vine Brook, adjacent to the Great Meadow, and now we're putting up the new building above the Great Meadow. Mm-hmm. What environmental issues were taken up and discussed when this proposal came forward?
Well, as you know, we have a very thorough process. We had to go through conservation, we had to go through the Board of Health, we had to go through planning department. We got a thorough review from all. And one of the good things about new construction is we're required to rectify and resolve any situations that exist. So these properties are going to be state-of-the-art protection for the Great Meadow. And you know, everything will be upgraded to modern standards with catch basins and, you know, all sorts of protections in place to actually clean up the area. It's actually a very positive thing when a property gets redeveloped, that we have to go up to the modern rules and regulations. You know, water will no longer be running off the site into the stream and things of that nature. All that will be resolved through, you know, engineering and catch basins and different cleaning systems. So it's a huge improvement for the environmental standpoint.
Well, 40 years prior to your tenure here, the DPW cited a salt shed directly on that site, so you can imagine why some of the old timers might have a concern about what's going on in there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where is it in terms of occupancy? How, I know it's far along. I've seen the steel erection, that's done. When do you see occupancy?
It's on time and under budget, so it's proceeding according to plan. We haven't had any major issues since we started. If I had to guess, we're probably looking at the end of next summer. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we'll have to shift facilities down there and begin work on the other part of it.
Right. Now, that Clark and Reed site was quite well constructed. The deconstruction must have been some sort of a task. We were there to see that.
It was, and again, you know, we wanted to utilize the existing buildings to the extent possible, but once you start modernizing up to the modern code, it actually became more expensive to try to keep the old facility and integrate it. We would have had to, you know, increase the structure and everything, and at a certain point, it becomes a lot cheaper to just start from scratch.
Right. And the high bays were way higher than what was necessary for a facility.
Yeah, I mean, we did review many options to try to keep the existing buildings there as part of our renovation.
Mm-hmm. Now, the next largest expenditure of the year was the MWRA, which we will be joining in a short period of time, next 4 or 5 years completely. What was the thought process in that we will be ultimately abandoning our own water supply? I mean, it was always a point of pride for Burlington that we were water independent. Now, suddenly, in the next few years, we're going to be dependent upon what many consider to be a huge white elephant in the state, in the Mass Water Resources Authority.
No, that's interesting, Phil, and I think if you had asked people during the 80s, they would have agreed with you, but I think that the MWRA has done a great job of getting their finances under control. They're really known as a well-run organization at this point, very predictable increases, and they have a very plentiful supply of pristine water. And just so that the viewers are aware, we still will be improving our redundancy, and we intend to continue to make town water here in Burlington at the Mill Pond. So the Mill Pond, we're intended on keeping that, and that'll hedge us against a problem at the MWRA, that we'll still be able to generate our own water.
But Great Meadow will be obsolete.
Yes, the plan is to abandon the Vine Brook treatment plant once we have our hookup to the MWRA. That plant is pulling water from wells, and quite frankly, it's not the most pristine water. It's always been healthy to drink and meets all government regulations. But as regulations increase and as testing to be able to test for these compounds in the water improves and they can test at a much finer level, what we suspect is that the problems that we have with that water supply are only going to increase in the future. And it's going to become more and more expensive to try to treat that water. We could have retrograded that plant to sort of accommodate the compound that's giving us an issue down there right now. But what about the next compound? And then, you know, are we just chasing our tail? It's just not a pristine source of water, as everybody knows. There was many years ago, people really weren't concerned about, you know, what they did with manufacturing compounds, and they typically ended up back in our water supply, and we've been victimized by that in this scenario.
Well, in the 80s, certainly when the sewer line dissolved and the degreasing agents went into the Vine Brook, that was an aeration plant essentially, right, where you're aerating the water to get the off gas. But we also have an iron and manganese, a naturally occurring organic issue down there as well.
Yep, and there's high salt content down there, which has been a problem for modern HVAC systems. The chemical reaction that's involved, because, you know, if you think of where that aquifer is located, there's a lot of salt usage in that area between 128, Route 3, the town.
The old salt barn.
The commercial parking lots, nobody's using salt, but everybody's using salt. And that ultimately ends up in the water, and that's been causing, particularly our commercial users, quite a bit of investment in their HVAC. It's not a good situation from that aspect as well.
Now, as the plant becomes obsolete, what are its, if any, are the plans to utilize that plant or the building itself within town operations.
Absolutely. That will become a site for a future town building. I don't know if that's going to be a police station. I don't know if the future needs would be a school of some sort, but it's actually quite a bit more usable land than one would suspect given the nearness to the aquifer. So conservation took a look at it. There's quite a bit of useful land area there for some future siting of a future town building.
Yeah, well, the police department, that's the first time I've heard that as a suggestion. That would seem to make perfect sense as part of a public safety campus with the new fire station there as well.
It's not a bad idea, and again, it becomes a good site for police simply because we don't have a lot of good sites.
Right.
You know, where we're not, in terms of municipality, we're land poor, and in particular within the town, but also with what the town holds. We don't have a lot of options in terms of, you know, where we could site a facility like that. And clearly, if you were to ask me, I think a police station on the municipal side of government is something that's going to be needed in the next upcoming years.
Well, the building's only 100 years old, right? So maybe they're due, who knows. Now, further on the subject of MWRA, they incurred enormous amounts of debt in the Deer Island, Nut Island, and Big Dig, their portion of the Big Dig expenses. Where are we in terms of picking up portions of that debt? Are we excluded from that, or any debt going forward? How do we fit into the debt puzzle with them?
Now, the way that the MWRA has handled that is they charge an entrance fee based upon how much water usage a new customer intends upon using. It's currently about $4 million for every 1 million gallons per day. So basically what that is a cost to get into the club, and it's basically to rectify all the other investment that the other communities have already made to make it the state-of-the-art system that it is. Right. They've already paid for that over the years, and you know, it's an attempt to recoup some of that cost from new customers. So that's already factored into our planning and our debt and
okay, so that would be about $20 million for us, you think, in that neighborhood?
At this point in time, for the first 1 million gallons, it's 4.3. And then as we complete the entire line to the Arlington line, we'll be able to make some judgments as to how much additional water we want to take to replace, you know, to be able to take the mill pond down for maintenance and whatnot. So we'll have to make a judgment at that point. But it's currently approximately $4 million for, you know, an average of 1 million gallons a day is sort of the metric that they use.
Okay. Now, where are we in completion of that project? I think we just appropriated $3 million to continue there was a $20 million appropriation from the state to conclude this?
It's about $27 million total, broken up into a couple different phases. And by the end of December here, we'll have phase 1 hooked up. And what that is, that's a line that will allow us to get water through Lexington, MWRA water through Lexington, and that will approximately cover the 1 million gallons a day that we lost at the Vine Brook treatment plant from shutting down the wells out of an abundance of caution. So right. That's the short-term solution that will allow Public Works and John Sanchez to breathe and be able to sleep at night without, you know, worried about losing the town's entire water system through a break or some other, you know.
Now, we've already incurred, or recently, Mr. Sanchez announced water rate increases. And now part of this is to offset that cost. Where does that bring us in terms of comparable communities, in terms of what the average homeowner can expect for a bill on an annual basis?
Well, we're still on target for the plan we presented to town meeting at the time to enter the MWRA. The plan that we presented was water increases over a period of 10 years to get to where we needed to be, and the impact on the average residential homeowner was calculated to be approximately $10 a year on their average bill.
During that period of time?
Yep, $10 a year over 10 years, and just to sort of put that in perspective right now, we are the lowest water sewer community combined annual cost for our residents within the 128 belt. It's not really close. Mm-hmm. So even if you added on that additional $100 in the first year, we still would have been the lowest in the region combined water and sewer annual usage. As you know, the way that the town accomplishes this is a lot of this is covered under our tax levy already. So we fund the water sewer department mostly out of property taxes. That's always been a decision of the Board of Selectmen. And there's a thought process behind that, as your property tax bill is tax deductible,
And
your water sewer bill is
not.
not. So
Right.
it could behoove, it's a benefit to the residents in that regard. And the way it's set up has worked out well over time. But we're still, again, the rates that we charge are the lowest by far in the region.
Now, the water ban, a source of annoyance for everyone in town for the last few years. And this hasn't solely been because of the drought, has it?
No, we have a bountiful water supply underneath our aquifer at the Vine Brook. We just don't have the ability to treat enough of that water in a timely enough fashion to handle our high peak demands. As everybody knows, during the spring and the summer, everybody wants to water their lawn, everybody's outside working in their garden. And we'll go from approximately, and don't hold me to these figures, but during the winter time, we may use approximately 2.5 million gallons per day. We'll spike up to 5.5 million gallons, 6 million gallons per day in the summertime. And those are the conditions that we really can't handle. Not because there's not enough water down there, it's just simply a matter that we can't treat it fast enough or treat enough of it to keep the system going with both plants fully operational.
And the MWRA had placed some restrictions as well if we were going to have access to their water in terms of a ban as well.
It's a state agency that determines whether or not we're even allowed into the MWRA. They'll welcome us with open arms. I believe that they have a 4-year water supply, even if we had a continuous drought. So they have a plentiful water supply out there. It's very clean water. But, state regulators are, just concerned about water usage in general. So we had to make the pitch because we're essentially taking water from a different basin and bringing it here to Burlington. And people want to know that there are valid reasons that we're doing that, and it's not just simply for residential irrigation. And it's not in our case. It's a safety, it's a redundancy situation. And again, we'd like to get away from the bans too. And people take a lot of pride in their homes. No matter how you feel about no matter how you feel about water conservation, people do take a tremendous amount of pride, and they're willing to pay for the water to keep their properties looking good. And some other people have a difference of opinion that you should never waste clean drinking water on grass. So that's what we're dealing with at the state level. And
well, it's also unemployment by virtue of the number of landscapers that I see around town these days. Now, one last question on the subject, and let's talk about sewer for a moment. How are we doing in that regard? For years we had a problem where the sewer line would pressurize, and we'd have to relieve that pressure at the Vine Brook pumping station, essentially allowing somewhat treated sewage directly into the Vine Brook. We haven't had that occur for a while. Do you feel as though that's completely under control?
Yes, I'm not aware that we've done it any time recently, Phil.
Back
to when you used to report on it.
About 5 years, I think, since the last.
So we've done a tremendous job with what they call the infiltration program, and that's work that we do to the sewer system to prevent rainwater and groundwater from getting in, as well as illegal hookups into the system. We got so good at it that we had to invest in a line in Woburn a couple of years ago that we use out of town, and we got the same credit from them for making that investment in terms of just providing for more sewerage to go through those lines, as opposed to, we don't want to be sending clean water down to the treatment plant to pay to have it treated.
Well, they had made the same mistake we did. We put our sewer line directly through the Great Meadow, our water supply, and they put their sewer line directly next to Hon Pond. So problem, certainly.
Yeah, well, we're at the end of the line, so
yeah, right.
Our system's only as good as Woburn's system.
Exactly.
So.
Now let's talk trash. We've had a good run. The Charles George case is over. The tipping fees have dropped. But we've had a problem now on recycling. Explain to us what's going on there.
Well, on the simplest level, there became a point in time where there were too many recyclables, and China basically got out of buying our recyclable materials. So there was no market for these recyclables. There was a period of time where we would get paid pretty handily for recycling.
Right.
And it sort of flipped to the point now where since there's no market for our recycling companies to turn around and sell these materials, it's almost as costly to recycle it as it is to get rid of it as trash. Right. So the whole paradigm has shifted from where recycling was actually something that we were sort of breaking even on because of the resale market. It was relatively inexpensive. Now it's almost as expensive as disposing of our trash, and that's, you know, through no fault of anyone here in Massachusetts. It's just simply a worldwide condition, and I'm told that the primary driver is that China not purchasing as much of our recyclables.
Well, they didn't take the mixed, I guess, is what the big problem was.
That's part of it too. It had to be pristine, clean, and
Right.
separated and all that. And as we know, we all enjoy our one-stop recycling, throw it all in the same bin. I think as a resident, I know I enjoy that where I live, and sometimes that's not as great for the recycling end of things, where they would prefer to have pristine product, whether glass
Plastic,
or
cardboard, etc.
Exactly.
What is our rate at this point? I think we made a peak of somewhere in the order of 22% of our trash flow, trash stream was recycled. Are we improving on that?
I apologize, I don't have those figures handy, but my understanding was that the town over the years has gotten very good at recycling. So we've done a good job with that.
Okay, now one more on the DPW, and that's snow plowing. You've been having a problem getting contractors last year. Any problem this year? Are we fully staffed? I know the first storm seemed to be pretty good.
Well, it's not just us, Phil. This is a problem in the entire state with other towns. Contractors just aren't up for this type of work anymore. There's plenty of building going on, and you know, if you talk to the folks that actually do the snow plowing, it sounds like a great idea, but it becomes a little bit of a drag after a while in terms of the schedule and working all night and whatnot. So
and hoping for snow.
Yeah, right. You know, investing in the equipment and hoping for snow. So what many communities have done and what we've done is we've, you know, more in tune for relying on our own staff to do the snow plowing. You know, we went through a period of time where it made sense to have more contractors, but we're primarily relying on, you know, our own workers now and our own equipment to do most of the snow removal.
Good. Let's move on to the fire department. I believe, did we cut the ribbon for the new fire station this year, or was it late last year?
We did. It was right around the changeover. So
yeah.
right around when I took over. So that facility, if everybody's seen it, is gorgeous. It's working out well.
On time and under budget?
That was on time and under budget, and we had a great team managing that. It's a beautiful building. I'm sure you've been down there, and you know that's going to serve the needs of that part of town well into the future. I think we identified a sort of a change where in call volume between that station and the center station, and it was, believe it or not, center station had the most call volume, but due to the type of development and the mall and things that are on that end of town, it started to flip over. So we have a lot of options now. If the call volume increases that way, we can redeploy trucks and equipment to that station without any modification. So it gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of staffing and also in terms of the future. It's built to accommodate. If we ever got to the point in the future where we needed an additional piece of equipment on the road, the building is ready to accommodate that.
Now, there's another important transition in the fire department as we move into the ALS. Explain to us what that is.
Okay, so the town has historically run an ambulance service, which is BLS, Basic Life, and that is sort of an EMT-based service. So the premium service...
Which was a step up historically from 30 years ago when the EMTs weren't on the wagon.
Correct. I mean, I think, you know, fire services doing ambulance, I don't know when it came into play, but, you know, we provide a great service as EMTs, but there's only so much EMTs are allowed to do under law. Decision was made, you know, years ago. A lot of private, we use a backup service for paramedics, which would be an Action Ambulance or Armstrong.
Right.
And they've served us well over the years. So
that was by contract, correct?
By contract. They would pick up our very needy patients, if you want to put it that way. The EMTs can handle up to a certain level, but paramedics can handle a much higher level.
Important particularly for our location, Route 3 and 128, in terms of trauma patients.
Yeah, and our residents.
Right.
The bottom line is, with all of our firefighters, us manning a paramedic ambulance, we are at your house with higher saving ability to save you much quicker. So they get there as soon as the fire department does now. And previously, you know, the Armstrong ambulance may be in the north side of town, or it may be in Arlington, so there might be a delay in us getting a paramedic to the scene. Now the paramedics show up with the fire department, and anybody that's involved in that type of business of saving lives will tell you that minutes are very important, you know, when you need a life-saving treatment. So we're very confident. It's unfortunate that the transition occurred right prior to the pandemic hitting, so I don't think that it got its due from the press, and we weren't able to sort of cut ribbons or talk about how great that service is. But we're very confident that by offering paramedic service that much quicker to our residents, that we're going to save lives over time.
Where are we in the transition period, and I assume in the hiring process this is all going to be reflected as well?
We're a 24/7 paramedic now, all by the town. At the beginning, we were quite concerned because we don't have, the whole staff isn't paramedics at this point. So I believe at the time we started out with 12 paramedics, and that was considered the bare minimum that you could rely on the paramedic service. I don't want to have anybody think that they haven't had coverage. Anytime that we don't have coverage, we still have Armstrong as a backup as well. But almost since the day we started, we've been fortunate to be able to provide that service in-house 24/7 with the paramedic service. But it was a concern of ours at the beginning. We only had 12 paramedics. If between vacations and scheduling, you need 2 of them on an ambulance. You know, we did have some concerns as to what happens on those days where we're unable to staff it. Obviously, we had the Armstrong in place, but it's worked out better than we could have anticipated.
Okay, a couple more questions on fire, and we'll move on. First of all, how did you deal with staffing levels and service levels providing that service during the pandemic? Still at this point, was there segregation involved? I mean, how did you manage that?
In terms of not getting people
The staff,
infected?
yeah, infecting the whole firehouse.
Well, and believe it or not, we've had, those guys took the hit on infections at the beginning of the pandemic. We got better over time. They very diligently, if you ever see them, they wear masks 24/7 over there, and they have to. They live in a house together. And you know, it was a big risk for us. One of the biggest risks from the pandemic townwide is having a whole department quarantined. You know, we're talking about it now. You know, there's no special exclusion for snowplow drivers. If we have a division of the highway, 6 or 7 folks get sent home due to quarantine or exposure, you know, what does that mean to our snowplow operation? So it's required us to get creative. I think the employees have handled it great. We have had quarantines and infections throughout town departments, and everybody sort of handled it like pros. So we're really pleased with that whole thing, but it did definitely require changes in the way you know, we do business, and you know, the way you interact with your coworkers. We have to be constantly vigilant that, you know, you're not putting yourself in a situation where you're either exposing someone else or you're getting exposed.
Shutting the department down. Now, there are 2 major incidents. Fortunately, no major fires that I'm aware of, but we had both the, strangely enough, a pipe burst, I guess, which was the major property damage incident in the town, and then also, I guess, we had a recent chemical incident, much like we had at Buffalo Wild Wings. Explain what happened on those 2.
Well, I think it's just a common misuse of cleaning solvents in both cases. You know, Buffalo Wild Wings, as we know, had a very tragic ending.
Fatality.
You know, these are things that us as regular folks, we would never even think about. You know, you just clean it up and you throw some of this down, you throw some of that down without understanding how they relate together. I'm a little bit less familiar with the most recent incident.
Tuscan Kitchen, I guess.
Yeah, something similar.
Yeah, drain cleaner, yeah, but
We
our
did
guys
have
responded.
a pretty bad fire on Maryville with a fatality earlier.
Oh, that's right, Muriel O'Brien and her son, yes.
Yeah, you know, if you listen to the scanner, they get sent out quite a bit during the day for a variety of different reasons. And I'm not sure which pipe burst you're referring to.
The extended care, I guess.
Oh, that was a fairly recent one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, building was shut down due to, you know, just needed to be gutted. It was a very substantial.
4-inch pipe under town pressure is That's a bad thing.
Yes,
That's a bad thing.
especially with the hotels now at lower occupancy.
Right,
Less
right.
people to say, hey, there's a problem down the hall there. So
Right, before the
it
6
did
inches
quite a bit of
water.
damage before they were able to resolve it.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is it'll take it off the tax rolls for a period of time while it's under reconstruction, or at least a reduced tax increase, tax income. Okay, let's move on to the police department. They had a couple of good pitches this year. I think one, which I don't think you can talk about yet, but Detective Brown, I guess, did one on an elderly scam, and then we can talk about their manning and what's going on there. Tell us what happened in the elderly scam.
Well, these guys do so much, these men and women do so much great work. I'm really not in tune to all of it. I mean, they get kudos, or as Chief Kent says, kudos on a constant basis. So, you know, I'm not really, you know, other than, you know, on a high level managing it, I'm not involved in the day-to-day of the police department other than to just get letters of appreciation from the residents. And again, I can't tell you how proud I am of men and women over there and the professionalism of that department, like our fire department. They make me proud on a daily basis. And,
Well, Rich did an in-depth story on that, so we can just say that they caught a perpetrator who scammed a woman out of $8,000, and they got him out of state. How they did it, I don't know. And then there was another one which you weren't privy to talk about. Has anything happened on that? There was an amount of money that was confiscated, etc. Is that still ongoing, or should we pass on that?
Yeah, we should just pass on it.
Pass
But
on
like
that.
I say, they get involved in a lot of things that maybe the residents don't realize. You know, the same attributes that make Burlington a great place to live and a great place to work. Accessibility to highways makes it a great
Attractive.
place to
Try and do
pursue
crime.
criminal activity as well. So, you know, our police and fire departments are, you know, I have the scanner in my office, and they are flying all over the place all day long, and they just do a wonderful job.
Right. Where are we at staffing? I know that we were manning up a little bit in that department. Has the pandemic interrupted that process?
Yes, during the most recent cuts, we had to hold off on, you know, several years ago, we did a usage study, and it determined that we were short about 5 officers. So over the past 5 years, we had added an officer per year to the staffing. And this most recent one, which would have been the 5th officer, we sort of had to hold back on based upon what the pandemic had done to our budget. So that was a cut, you know, last fall at town meeting.
And we've been ahead of the curve in terms of diversity in that department as well, haven't we?
Yes, the police department is not in civil service, which means that we get a tremendous pool of talented applicants from all different races, backgrounds, religions. We get them from all over the state because, you know, many police departments operate under the civil service system, which is tied specifically into testing, based like that. And if you saw the pool of candidates that we go through, it's very hard to even pick good candidates. And as a result of that, we've been, you know, we have quite a diverse, it's one of our most diverse departments. And again, I'm really happy to say that, you know, everybody that's been hired over there has been the best available officer, and it had nothing to do with, you know, we weren't trying to fill any quotas or anything like that,
right.
But we're able to pick from such a talented pool of candidates that we're able to, you know, really address some of those things and still get the best person available.
And you've had a couple of part-timers, I think, on the psychology side, domestic abuse, domestic incident types of people?
Yeah, we have
for both the department and for the resident?
We have a social worker who works with our police department. She gets quite a bit of work, and you know, she's able to follow up when, you know, something may start out as a police call and may end up being, you know, a resident that's in distress and could use some services. They could use a referral to some place to get some help for some other issues. So it may not always be a criminal thing, and that's where our social worker can really sort of step in and try to help people that maybe have a habitual run-ins with the police for various things. And, you know, we really have we put a lot of effort into that between our social workers at Youth and Family Services, you know, our Board of Health, our Council on Aging. They have a task force where they try to deal with residents in distress. They may come to our attention due to consistent ambulance calls or consistent police calls to a resident. But we really have a team of people that's trying to connect
Intervene,
residents with services to try to get them help. Because, like I say, a lot of times it's not a real ambulance call, a real police call. It's somebody that's in distress and they need some help in other ways.
Incidentally to that, on the drug abuse issue, I know we've had some problems with that in days gone by. Are we seeing lower incidences of that in the town, particularly in fatalities since we've introduced Narcan?
I'm not privy to the numbers, but my understanding is that one area that people are really suffering is if people are dealing with addiction during this pandemic. It makes it more difficult to access services. They're alone. They can't get a hug. They can't see their counselors. They can't go to their group things. And so I do believe that people really are suffering with addiction during this. I'm not privy to any numbers that say that we're being hit with it any worse than other communities, but I think that we all know that the pandemic's been really hard with people that have been struggling with addiction.
The after effects we won't be able to measure for, I'm sure, a year or two in any event.
For sure.
Let's move on to the transportation issue. The B line was always a hot topic in town. Some argued for it very strenuously. Others argued against it because it seemed like it was constantly empty. You've since inaugurated a pilot program which is possibly going to eliminate that. I know the funding ends, I think, in July.
No, with December. We extended it last town meeting.
Oh, to December.
To December 31st.
Okay. Tell us about the pilot program that's in place and what kind of levels of success are you having up to this point?
Well, again, it's somewhat of a victim of the pandemic, but we were able to identify all the regular B-line users and try to hook them up with the new service. And the new service is essentially an Uber or Lyft-like service where a person gets pre-qualified to be a part of it, and they pay the first $1, and I think the town picks up the next 10. We've determined that would get somebody anywhere from Burlington to Burlington, but if they want to go to Winchester Hospital, we'd still they pick up the first $1, we pick up 10, and then they pick up the rest, so it's still a great benefit. The feedback we got at the beginning, and it's a little difficult because it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and at that time people couldn't even, you couldn't even access an Uber or a Lyft like that. But it was very positive. The residents liked the fact that it was a door-to-door service.
Point to point, sure.
So you don't have to walk down the block to a bus stop or anything like that.
In the winter.
It was available when you wanted it. You didn't have to wait on a schedule. It could operate after hours. I think there was about 30 or 35 hardcore B-line users that were able to transition most of them over into the program. Right. And we got positive feedback at the beginning, but it's been difficult to evaluate just because of the circumstances going on in the world.
But it would seem, based on the numbers that I had seen, that this would be likely more effective and less expensive than the
And that was
program.
the goal: less expensive, better customer service for the resident using the service. One of the hurdles that we had was, senior members in technology. I think many of us, we're very accustomed to calling an Uber and getting it to pick us up. But
I've never been in one. I'm still behind
well, maybe
the
you
times.
could use this. There's a program basically called Go Grandparent that was part of this. And what that is, it's almost like a concierge service for folks that may not be as technologically savvy, so that they could access the program as well. So instead of doing it yourself on an app, there's a phone number you could call to organize a ride, and they'll vet the drivers and do all of that. So that was a nice element as part of it for those in the community that may not, be as comfortable using technology on a phone, or maybe don't have access to a phone. They could still access the same services as the other residents. So,
okay, let's move on to economic development. That was a development this year in that you had lobbied hard for an economic development director, and apparently we stole a young lady from Lexington with a lot of experience, a California who did a reverse go west young lady, she came east. How was that worked out? Melissa Tentaklis, I think, by the way, is
no,
her
that's
name.
correct. And she was fortunate enough to start right before the pandemic. So, I think you were a lot of part of the discussions that we had in order to bring that position to town. And
on the negative side, I might add, although I've come around.
Fair enough. But, I think at that time we were concerned with our competitiveness. Attracting businesses became a much more competitive thing. We were no longer able to survive on, just being Burlington and having a great location and great amenities. Other towns were actively pursuing businesses to their communities, and in many cases using the fact that they were next door to Burlington as a selling point. And we wanted to be competitive going forward. So that was really the thought process behind it. Mm-hmm. What happened since then was, thank God that we were able to do that at the time we did, because her contributions here through the pandemic have just been just amazing. And, just from the basic reopening task force, she handled all of the restaurant requests for outdoor seating. She worked with
planning board,
planning. We had representatives from planning, building, board of health, police and fire, just to get these businesses open safely outside and address any issues. Mm-hmm. She's been putting a big focus on the town center as well. Mm-hmm. It's
also good. The state aid for the small business, I think the micro program
she's gotten several grants for micro loans to micro businesses, and we also have a life sciences training grant that we're working with the town of Bedford, where a resident that may have an interest in a life sciences, a resident or a student even who has an interest in a life science career.
Or somebody has a career change,
midlife career changer, or someone who lost their job, they'll be able to get some training in a life sciences field through this grant. And her theory is we can't just say that we want business here. We want to say, hey, we want to educate our workforces for your businesses. We want to be that well-rounded place.
Get on the same page. And she's, as you know, has a great personality, and she's really had a large impact from what I can see. And yes, from what I hear, she's connected throughout the business community already in such a short period
I can't imagine what it would have been like for me personally, trying to handle the pandemic and the other employee aspects of it, and at the same time trying to help the businesses as well. Would have been overwhelming.
Sure.
The restaurant still might not be open yet. She just did a great job. She had a great team working with her, and she's a real go-getter. And that was a really lucky, fortuitous, but we're very grateful to have her through this process, and really looking forward to see what she can do without the circumstances with the pandemic going on.
Well, her job may be cut out for her in a large way as we try and refill these buildings post-pandemic. Let's move on to a little negative item in the economic area, and that's the tax incentive financing agreement, which we've used, I think, in 3 or 4 different cases, but you had to put the hammer down once this year on one of those deals. Could you explain that to us?
Sure. What you're referring to is the town had an existing tax increment financing agreement with Keurig for their headquarter building. Beautiful facility down there on South Ave. So the town entered into that during a time frame where development was really down, and Keurig, Green Mountain, great company, looking for a new headquarters. So we incentivized them into that building. They had some promises that they had to make on their end in terms of locating jobs here, and they had about 5 years to do so. So the town did give the tax increment for several years, and as of the deadline, they were unable to meet their commitment to provide the jobs, which is what we were looking for. Bodies in the building that were going to contribute to our local economy. They were unable to sort of hold up their end of the deal, and I think we put an end to the tax agreement. And again, I think it was still a great success for the town and for Keurig. We got a great corporate headquarters which is now Dr. Pepper. They're an affiliate of them. Beautiful building built in town. A lot of value was created. We did give a little bit of break on the taxes to get it done there. But we benefited greatly, and I think they've benefited greatly, and it was a good time to call call the agreement to an end. And
Okay, and conversely, Millipore seems to have turned out to be a great success with their new building.
no, Millipore is amazing. They're very accessible to us. They contribute to the town in many different ways, whether it's the school system, the COA. They're very active contributors here in town. Most importantly, if you know, in terms of the town's initiative to attract life sciences, you know, they are a world-renowned
World-class.
company.
Sure.
As they worked with us, they reminded us that their parent company, KGA Merck in Germany, was older than the United States itself.
Right.
So they've been everything as advertised. They got a beautiful facility up there. They planted their flag, and the benefit that we really saw with them is they're a company that does work for pharmaceuticals and life science companies. So every year they are demonstrating for companies in their lab. They're bringing companies to Burlington to show them what they're working on for them. And, you know, we're hopeful that, you know, we will attract some business that way too. But beautiful building, beautiful campus up there, and just a great company, and they've been a great partner to the town.
Now, life sciences bring up the issue, much the same the printed circuit board industry brought up issues 50 years ago in what safeguards are in place in terms of what they're doing in these buildings, particularly when we think about what might have happened in Wuhan if this virus, this coronavirus, is an escapee of a Chinese lab, if whatever's been alleged. Mm-hmm. What safeguards are in place in terms of bringing in this type of new industry?
We have, as you're aware, we have a very educated Board of Health here in town, and they regulate that process there through a very strict process of going through the Board of Health on the safety precautions. You know, I would say 15 years ago, you may remember the discussion. We were going to try to zone a building. I think it was where Keurig ended up at the time, and there was quite a bit of public outcry back then because people just didn't really understand what types of work was being done in these labs, and as you point out, you know, what type of safety precautions were in place.
We don't want the zombie apocalypse.
Exactly. So, you know, it was a little bit less known there. So I think that, you know, Massachusetts has become a center of these type of labs, and I think that they're well regulated, and it's in their best interest to be safe. And again, on our end of it, they go through a pretty significant Board of Health process there to satisfy them in terms of the safety.
Okay, I'm sure everybody's been waiting for us to talk about it, so let's get in on COVID-19, its impact on the town, and primarily, I think from a tax standpoint and a valuation standpoint is how I'd like to approach this. We started the fiscal year began last July. You went through the budget process up until January. This thing hits. Bring us forward in the budget process after January. You had a guideline was in place. We had a fixed tax increase in place. What happened then?
All right, well, for the previous fiscal year, we were fine. We were able to absorb the increase in costs, which mostly revolved around the Board of Health. At the time, they had some increased expenses in terms of contract tracing and all the things, additional burdens that were put on them. So we managed to get through fiscal year 2020.
And that ends June 30th. June 30th, beginning July 1st. So that's fiscal 2020 is ending June
Correct.
30th. Now you're faced with a budget that's already almost approved, or actually was approved in May, prior to the beginning of the fiscal year. What happens then?
Yeah, so what happened was we were already well along in our budget process at the time. As you know, town meeting got delayed because of COVID issues, and it really wouldn't have done us well to try to make cuts on the fly, given the amount of work and the amount of hours that everyone had put into that budget from, you know, the Ways and Means Committee, our elected boards, our department heads. We were too far along in the process to try to do that. So what we did at that time was we asked town meeting to approve the budget as it was presented, and that we would get back to them at September town meeting with some budget reductions once we've had a better opportunity to evaluate the situation, which we did. We went back in September with about approximately $2.1 million in cuts to that budget. We still consider ourselves pretty fortunate compared to what could have been. The big areas that the town's really suffering, what you might imagine, economic activity related, meals tax, hotel tax has been devastated,
Water and
building
sewer
permits.
consumption.
water being down, that doesn't help us, and may help us with water bans, but it doesn't help us with the budget.
People don't realize, though, that we're probably between $3 and $5 million a year in building permits, which is a huge element
Yeah,
of
a couple
our
$1 million
income.
a year in building permits. It's a huge generator for us. That all sort of evaporated. So we really, in many cases, it's a tremendous blessing to have such a vibrant business community when I talk to other communities. But in this particular case, we ended up getting hurt more than a community that just was primarily residential. Right. They didn't have to worry about losing meals tax and losing hotel tax. Right. They didn't really rely on it as much as we do. So
we got $10 million in stabilization, $10 million in free cash. OPEB's got some money in it. The insurance fund's got a bunch of money in it. Are you going to make this budget? Are you going to come in June 30th without a deficit?
Yes. Yeah, we fully intend to come in without a deficit. And again, I think we've talked about it. For our standpoint, fiscal year 2022, which is the upcoming fiscal year, was really the big one for us. Right. One of the big benefits for the current fiscal year, the state held us harmless on state aid. So despite
meaning the cherry sheet remained at the same level?
Yes, they promised us at least what we had anticipated. So no increase, but level. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we can count on that for the upcoming fiscal year. I think that is the next shoe to drop. Mm-hmm. As you're aware, the town has always budgeted very conservatively. So we were able to absorb, approximately $4 million of the hit without really doing much. Right. Then we had to go back for the additional $2 million in cuts in September. So on local receipts and overall revenue, we've already adjusted for approximately $6 million.
In decline.
In decline.
In decline, and that's primarily in hotel and meals tax, correct?
Hotel, meals, building permits, anything.
Well, building permits, yeah. Okay.
So again, we didn't have to deal with a state aid shortfall as well, but we do feel that that's going to be a major consideration for fiscal 22, as well as the fact that, we're tracking the meals and hotel. Meals is coming back a little bit. Hotel is, could be $4 million a year to the town, and people just aren't using hotels. They're not traveling for business. They're not able to charge the rates, and our hotels are suffering very badly. So that's going to take a long time to recover, in my opinion.
Right. Now, the next shoe that could drop is in 2022, which would be the commercial valuations, which don't come out until January 20th, I think?
They'll be based on this upcoming January 1st values.
Upcoming. So what we're seeing is the restaurants have been empty, the hotels are empty, the mall is a ghost town, and if you drive through town, you see parking lots that are probably occupied by maybe 1/10 of the capacity. Mm-hmm. In another example of productivity gains by these people who are working at home, both of my children are in Boston and in high-rent districts at big firms, and they've already been told that their firms are looking at a 50% reduction nationwide in floor space. Mm-hmm. How do you see this affecting Burlington's commercial tax rate and its commercial occupancy rate and the abatement process?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a major concern for us because our system works great. As many of the residents should be aware, the business community picks up a large sum of our tax levy. So they pick up a big share of the freight here for what we spend in town.
Classification, they pay 66%, we pay 33%, even though the values are relatively
almost
same.
the opposite. Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
yeah. So they make up, say, 33% of our total value in town, and they pay 66% of the taxes. Right. So it's really great math when it works right. But clearly, in 2022, we expect to be faced with declining commercial values. And as everybody in town is aware, the residential market's doing great.
Skyrocketing,
This place is off the charts in terms of people wanting to be here and buy homes here and pay significant money. So that's typically a great thing, but in this scenario, it's not great for the way our tax system works. Mm-hmm. We want to have commercial values growing in conjunction with residential values, and we do feel that this is a major concern for the upcoming year. We have heard from the business community. Leases are being paid here in town. We have high quality companies here in town. Mm-hmm. Occupancy is still pretty strong. There's not actually people in the buildings, but they're paying leases, they're paying rent. So I think the real risk will sort of trickle out over several years, and what you're referring to in terms of companies wanting less space. As leases renew, I think that's when we're going to see. So, you know, they don't all renew on the same year, so I think that will trickle out over time and will result in, you know, less people taking up less office space. So that's definitely a concern.
Let's talk, excuse me, philosophically for a moment, and both from an impact on the town. How long can this go on? I mean, we've seen what the infection rates are, but we've also seen the mortality rates are very low. Unless you're between over 75 with comorbidities, you're likely to be sick, but not to die. How long, and I see now Boston is tightening up again, maybe, and the governor is contemplating reissuing the shutdowns. How long can we go along financially without a tremendous effect here? And aren't these rather Orwellian actions taken by the state? I mean, this looks like, or draconian maybe is the word that I would use.
Well, in this case, like I say, I just want to give a lot of credit to the Board of Health and our Health Director, Susan Luminell, and her whole staff. We've relied on them throughout this pandemic to bring order to the situation. They've approached it very rationally and thoughtfully without going too far in one direction, too far in another direction. We've sort of taken in the guidance from the state and you know, implemented that. They haven't seen the need to do anything, as you would say, more draconian as they're doing in Somerville and whatnot. They're trying to really balance, and what we want to do is just try to really balance out public safety versus, you know, people's rights to earn a living. And you know, I think that they've done a great job in guiding us in that direction. You ask how long we could stay. I mean, we're really hurting. We are really hurting. I think you may recall from your Ways and Means that, you know, we've done a great job of being conservative over the years, and the town is conservative by nature. So we have built up reserves that will get us through.
Better than other people might have.
Better than ever. I think you're aware that we're $11 million below what we could tax under Prop 2.5. But again, that's not the answer. You know, just taxing our way out of it. You know, that just puts additional burdens onto the residents and the businesses as well. So that's a tough balancing act there. We do have the reserves available, as you mentioned. I think we have $17 million in free cash, given that we didn't spend any. You know,
this year,
we tightened the belt, and $10 million in stabilization. So we do have funds there, and that's going to be the trick in the 2022 budget process, is to try to balance out how much from reserves, how much from taxes,
without depleting them.
Without depleting them, and understanding that, you know, we can't rely on those forever. So there has to be a sort of a plan. Once you start using reserves in the budget, you need a plan to stop using reserves on the budget, and that's
well,
really
most importantly
sort of
because of the bond rating. I mean, the reason we're AAA rated is primarily because of that, and naturally the rating directly relates to what we pay for borrowing costs. So I think retention of the reserves is going to be very important.
It is, and again, I think in terms of the rating agencies, at least they'll look at us relative to our peers, and I think relative to our peers, we're always going to look pretty good. But at the same time, it really is going to be difficult to have access to tax dollars but not use them, which we always do. It becomes a little bit more challenging in a situation like this, where, you know, we could be facing relatively drastic cuts. I think we got by okay in 2021 without having to do anything drastic, but...
Well, balance, again, is going to be the name of the game. We're going to have larger tax increases in all likelihood. I don't want to sound like a harbinger of doom, but if we do get an enormous increase in residential values and a decrease in commercial values, those tax dollars will shift to the residential.
And that's on top of any additional tax money you use. That happens if you start from ground zero and just change the mix of the values, the commercial going down, residential go up. Without spending an additional dollar, residents' taxes are still going up.
Without any of your union contracts coming into play, et cetera.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky.
Now let's look at, on the state side, what kind of feedback are you getting from the state in terms of where are they getting all this money? You know, they're doing grants, they're adding extra money to budgets, et cetera. Do you see a waterfall of tax increases potentially coming from the state?
Well, like I say, I don't want to opine upon what they may do on personal taxes. I think many of us local government managers sort of wondering how they're sort of piecing it together at the state level. We're hurting for revenues. They get a lot of their revenue from the same sources we do. I think their personal tax collections have been sort of on target, but they also rely on meals tax, and they get a lion's share of it compared. We only get a small slice of it. Right. So if we're hurting a little bit, they're hurting a lot in that area. And again, that's why I feel as though they're not going to be able to hold the state aid. Our state delegation, Cindy, Senator Friedman, and Representative Gordon, they worked hard to make sure that they protected us that year, because that would have been difficult in mid-range to have to face a state aid cut. But I do think that they'll have plenty of time to inform us about it this year, and I don't see any way that they're not going to be able to, they're going to have to cut state aid this year, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest impacts to us as a local community.
Right. Okay, unfortunately we've run out of time. I'd like to thank our guest, Paul Sagarino, who is the Burlington Town Administrator. Thank you for joining us, Paul.
Thank you for having me, Phil. I appreciate it.
And Burlington's certainly lucky at this point, based on what the conditions are, to have a seasoned hand at the helm. Thank you for joining us.